He Fell in Love with His Wife by 𝚲𝚑𝚊𝚙𝚎. Chapter 29. Husband and Wife in Trouble. Like many others with simple, strong natures, Holcroft could not be wrong-headed moderately, and his thoughts, once started in a direction, were apt to carry him much farther than the cause warranted. Engrossed in painful and rather bitter musings, he paid no heed to Jane and almost forgot his errand to town. I was a fool to ask that question, he thought. I was getting silly and sentimental with my talk about the picture and all that. She laughed at me and reminded me I was wasting time. Of course she can't like a hard-featured man like me. I'm beginning to understand her now. She made a business marriage with me and means to live up to her agreement. She is honest. She feels I've done her a great kindness and in giving her a home, and she's willing to be as self-sacrificing as the day is long to make it up to me. I wish she wasn't so grateful. There's no occasion for it. I don't want her to feel that every pleasant word and every nice act is so much toward paying a debt. If there was any balance in my favor, it was squared up long ago, and I was willing to call it even from the start. She's made me like her for her own sake, and not on account of what she does for me, and that's what I had in mind. But she's my superior in every way. She's growing to be as pretty as a picture, and I suppose I appear like a rather rough customer. Well, I can't help it, but it rather goes against me to have her think I've married him and I'm going to do my duty by him just as I agreed. She'll do her duty by this Jane in the same self-sacrificing spirit, and will try to make it pleasant for the child just because it's right and because she herself was taken out of trouble. That's the shape of her religion takes. 'Tain't a common form, I know, this returning good for good with compound interest. But her conscience won't let her rest until she does everything she can for me, and now she'll begin to do everything for Jane because she feels that self-sacrifice is a duty. Anybody can be self-sacrificing. If I made up my mind, I could ask Mrs. Mumpson to visit us all summer, but I couldn't like her to save my life, and I don't suppose 𝚫𝚑𝚊𝚙 can like me, beyond a certain point, to save her life. But she'll do her duty. She'll be pleasant and self-sacrificing and do all the work she can lay her hands on for my sake. But when it comes to feeling toward me, as I can't help feeling toward her, that wasn't in the bargain. And he startled Jane with a sudden, bitter laugh. Say, said the child, as if bent on adding another poignant reflection, if you hadn't married her, I could have come and cooked for you. You think I'd been better off if I'd waited for you, eh? You kinder looked as if you thought so. He made the hills echo with a laugh, excited both by his bitter fancies and the preposterous idea. She looked at him inquiringly and was much perplexed by his unwonted behavior. Indeed, he was slightly astonished at his own strange mood, but he yielded to it almost recklessly. I say, Jane, he began, I'm not a very good-looking man, am I? She shook her head in an emphatic agreement. I'm old and rough and hard-featured. Again she nodded approvingly. Children and some others speak the truth, he growled. I never had no teaching, but I'm not a fool, remarked Jane keenly. I guess I'm the fool in this case, he added. It don't make no difference to me, she said sympathetically. I'm going to mind you and not her. If you ever send her away, I'll cook for you. Send her away, exclaimed the farmer with a shiver. God forbid, there don't talk any more. For the next half-mile he drove in silence, with a heavy frown on his face. Then he broke out sternly. If you don't promise to mind Mrs. Holcroft and please her in everything, I'll leave you at the poorhouse door and drive home again. Course I will, if yous tells me so, said the child in trepidation. Well, I do. People will find that making her trouble is the surest way of making themselves trouble. She's got some hold on 'em, concluded Jane, who in listening to much gossip had often heard this expression, and now made a practical application of the idea. Watterly was greatly relieved when he saw Holcroft drive up with the fugitive. I was just going out to your place, he said, for the girl's mother insisted that you had enticed the child away. And the man laughed as if the idea tickled him immensely. Holcroft frowned, for he was in no mood for his friend's rough jests. "Go to your mother till I send for you," he said to Jane. "The fact that you had taken 2 other females from the house gave some colour to Mrs. Mumpson's views," pursued Watterly, who could take only the broadest hints as to his social conduct. He received one now. "Tom Watterly," said the farmer sternly, "did I ever insult your wife?" "By jocks, no, you never did, nor any man, I should say not." "Well, then don't you insult mine. Before I'd seen Mrs. Holcroft, you told me she was out of the common run. How much so you little know, and I don't want her mixed up with the common run, even in your thoughts." "Oh, well, now, I like that," said Watterly, giving Holcroft his hand. "You know I didn't mean any offence, Jim. It was only one of my foolish jokes. You were mighty slow to promise to love, honor, and obey, but hanged if you ain't more on the line than any man in town. I can see she's turning out well and keeping her agreement." "Yes, that's just what she's doing," said the farmer gloomily. "She's a good, capable woman that'll sacrifice herself to her duty any day. But it wasn't to talk about her I came. She's a sight better than I am, but she's probably not good enough for anybody in this town to speak to." "Oh, pshaw, now, Jim." "Well, I've come on disagreeable business. I didn't know that Mrs. Mumpson and her child were here, and I wish to the Lord they could both stay here. You found out what the mother is, I suppose?" "I should say so," replied Tom, laughing. "She's talked several of the old women to death already. The first day she was here, she called on my wife and claimed social relations, because she's so respectably connected, as she says. I thought Angie'd have a fit. Her respectable connections have got to take her off my hands." "I'm not one of them, thank goodness," resumed Holcroft. "But I'm willing to take the girl and give her a chance. At least, I'll do it." He corrected himself in his strict observance of truth. "You can see she's not a child to dote on, but I was sorry for her when I sent her mother away, and said I'd try and do something for her. The first thing I knew was she was at the house, begging me to either take her in or kill her. I couldn't say no, though I wanted to. Now you see what a kind of good Samaritan I am." "Oh, I know you. You'd hit a man between the eyes if he'd charged you with doing a good deed. But what does your wife say to adopting such a cherub?" "We're not going to adopt her or bind ourselves. My wife took the child's part and pleaded with me in her behalf, though I could see the young one almost made her sick. She thinks it's her duty, you know, and that's enough for her." "By jocks, Holcroft, she don't feel that way about you, does she?" "Why shouldn't she?" "Why should she? I can take about anything from Angie, but it wouldn't do for her to let me see that she disliked me so that I kind of made her sick." "Oh, thunder, Tom, you're getting a wrong impression. I was never treated better by anybody in my life than by Mrs. Holcroft. She's a lady, every inch of her. But there's no reason why she should dote on an old fellow like me." "Yes, there is. I have my opinion of a woman who wouldn't dote on a man that's been such a friend as you have." "Oh, hang it all, Tom, let's talk about business. She's too grateful, that's what worries me. By the way she took hold and filled the house with comfort, she made everything even from the start. She's been as good a friend to me as I to her. She's done all she agreed and more, and I'll never hear a word against her. The point I'm trying to get at is this. If Mrs. Mumpson will agree to never come near us or make trouble in any way, we'll take the child. If she won't so agree, I'll have nothing to do with the girl. I don't want to see her mother, and you do me one of the kindest turns you ever did a man by stating the case to her." "If I do," said Watterly, laughing, "you'll have to forgive me everything in the past and future." "I will, Tom, for I'd rather have an eye tooth pulled than face that woman. We're all right, just as we used to be at school, always quarreling, yet ready to stand up for each other to the last drop. But I must have her promise in black and white." "Well, come to my office and we'll try to arrange it. The law is on your side, for the county won't support people that anyone will take off its hands. Besides, I'm going to shame the woman's relations into taking her away, and they'll be glad there's one less to support." They drew up a brief, strong agreement, and Watterly took it to the widow to sign. He found her in great excitement, and Jane looking at her defiantly. "I told you he was the one who enticed away my offspring," she began almost hysterically. "He's a cold-blooded villain. If there's a law in the land, I'll—" "Stop!" thundered Watterly. His voice was so high and authoritative that she did stop. and with open mouth stared at the superintendent. "Now be quiet and listen to me," he continued. "Either you are a sane woman and can stop this foolishness, or else you are insane and must be treated as such. You have your choice. You can't tell me anything about Holcroft. I've known him since he was a boy. He doesn't want your girl. She ran away to him, didn't you?" to Jane, who nodded. "But he's willing to take her, to teach her something and give her a chance. His motive is pure kindness, and he has a good wife who'll—" "I see it all!" cried the widow, tragically clasping her hands. "It's his wife's doings. She wishes to triumph over me, and even to usurp my place in ministering to my child. Was there ever such an outrage, such a bold, vindictive female?" Here Jane, in a paroxysm of indignant protest, seized her mother and began to shake her so violently that she could not speak. "Stop that!" said Watterly, repressing laughter with difficulty. "I see you are insane, and the law will have to step in and take care of you both." "What will it do with us?" gasped the widow. "Well, it ought to put you in straitjackets to begin with." "I've got some common sense if mother ain't," cried Jane, commencing to sob. "It's plain the law will decide your mother's not fit to take care of you. Anyone who can imagine such silly, ridiculous things as she just said must be looked after. You may take a notion, Mrs. Mumpson, that I'm a murderer or a giraffe. It would be just as sensible as any of your talk." "What does Mr. Holcroft offer?" said the widow, cooling off rapidly. If there was an atom of common sense left in any of his pauper charges, Watterly soon brought it into play, and his vague threatenings of law were always awe-inspiring. "He makes a very kind offer that you would jump at if you had sense. A good home for your child. You ought to know she can't stay here and live on charity if anyone's willing to take her." "Of course I would be permitted to visit my child from time to time. He couldn't be so monstrously hard-hearted as—" "Oh, nonsense!" cried Watterly impatiently. "The idea of his letting you come to his house after what you said about him! I have no time to waste in foolishness, or he either. He will let Jane visit you, but you are to sign this paper and keep the agreement not to go near him or make any trouble whatever." "It's an abominable—" "Tut, that kind of talk isn't allowed here. If you can't decide like a sane woman, the law will soon decide for you." As was always the case when Mrs. Mumpson reached the inevitable, she yielded. The paper was signed, and Jane, who had already made up her small bundle, nodded triumphantly to her mother and followed Watterly. Mrs. Mumpson, on tiptoe, followed also, bent on either propitiating Holcroft, and so preparing the way for a visit, or else on giving him once more a piece of her mind. "All right, Holcroft," said Watterly as he entered the office. "Here's the paper signed." Was there ever such an— "Oh, how do you do, Mr. Holcroft?" cried the widow, bursting in and rushing forward with extended hand. The farmer turned away and looked as if made of stone. Changing her tactics instantly, she put her handkerchief to her eyes and moaned, "You never can have the heart to say I can't come and see my child. I've signed writings, 'tis true, under threats and compulsions, but I trust there will be relentings." "There won't be one relent," cried Jane. "I never want to see you again, and a blind post could see that he doesn't." "Jane," said Holcroft sternly, "don't speak so again. If strangers can be kind and patient with you, you can be so with your mother. She has no claims on me, and has said things which make it impossible for me to speak to her again, but I shall insist on your visiting and treating her kindly. Goodbye, Watterly. You've proved yourself a friend again." And he went rapidly away, followed by Jane. Mrs. Mumpson was so taken aback by Holcroft's final words and Watterly's stern manner as he said, "This is my office," that for once in her life she disappeared silently. Holcroft soon purchased the articles on his list, meanwhile racking his brains to think of something that he could buy for Alida. But the fear of being thought sentimental and of appearing to seek a personal regard for himself, not nominated in the bond, restrained him. On his way home he was again sunk in deep abstraction, but the bitterness of his feeling had passed away. Although as mistaken as before in his apprehension of Alida, his thoughts were kinder and juster. "I've no right to find fault or complain," he said to himself. "She's done all I ask and better than she agreed, and there's no one to blame if she can't do more. I must have been plain enough to her at first that I didn't want anything but a housekeeper, a quiet, friendly body that would look after the house and dairy, and she's done better than I even hoped. That's just the trouble. She's turned out so different from what I expected and looks so different from what she did that I'm just sort of carried away. I'd give half the farm if she was sitting by my side this June evening and I could tell her all I feel and know she was glad. I must be just and fair to her. I asked her to agree to one thing, and now I'm beginning to want a tremendous sight more. I want her to like not only her home and work and the quiet life she so longed for, but I want her to like me, to enjoy my society not only in a friendly, business-like way, but in another way. Yes, confound my slow wits. Somewhat as if she was my wife in reality and not merely in name, as I insisted. It's a mighty mean business to me, who have been so proud of standing up to my agreements and so exacting of others to do the same. I went away cold and stiff this afternoon because she wasn't silly and sentimental when I was. I'm to her an unpolished, homely, middle-aged man, and yet I sort of scoffed at the self-sacrifice which has led her to be pleasant and companionable in every way that her feeling is allowed. I wish I were better looking, so it wouldn't all be a sense of duty and gratitude. Gratitude be hanged! I don't want any more of it. Well now, James Holcroft, if you're the square man you supposed yourself to be, you'll just be as kind and considerate as you know how, and then you'll leave Älida to the quiet, peaceful life to which she looked forward when she married you. The thing for you to do is to go back to your first ways after you were married and attend to the farm. She doesn't want you hanging around and looking at her as if she were one of her own posies. That's something she wasn't led to expect, and it would be mean enough to force it upon her before she shows that she wishes it, and I couldn't complain if she never wished it. During the first hour after Holcroft's departure, Älida had been perplexed and worried, but her intuition soon led to hopefulness, and the beauty and peace of nature without aided in restoring her serenity. The more minutely she dwelt on Holcroft's words and manner, the more true it seemed that he was learning to take an interest in her that was personal and apart from every other consideration. If I am gentle, patient, and faithful, she thought, all will come out right. He's so true and straightforward that I need have no fears. When he returned and greeted her with what seemed his old, friendly, natural manner, and during a temporary absence of Jane, told her laughingly of the Mumpson episode, she was almost completely reassured. Suppose the widow breaks through all restraint and appears as did Jane, what would you do? He asked. Whatever you wished, she replied, smiling. In other words, what you thought your duty. I suppose that is what one should try to do. I guess you are the one that would succeed in doing it, even to Mrs. Mumpson, he said, turning hastily away and going to his room. She was puzzled again. I'm sure I don't dote on self-sacrifice and hard duty any more than he does, but I can't tell him that duty is not hard when it's to him. Jane was given the room over the kitchen which Mrs. Wiggins had occupied, and the farmhouse soon adopted her into its quiet routine. Holcroft's course continued to cause Älida dissatisfaction, which she could scarcely define. He was as kind as ever he had been, and even more considerate, but he not only gratified her wishes, but tried to anticipate them, while Jane's complete subserviency proved that she had been spoken to very plainly. One day she missed her spelling lesson for the third time, and Älida told her that she must learn it thoroughly before going out. The child took the book reluctantly, yet without a word. That's a good girl, said Älida, wishing to encourage her. I was afraid at first you wouldn't mind me so readily. He told me to. He'd fire me out of the window if I didn't mind you. Oh, no, I think he is very kind to you. Well, he's kind to you, too. Yes, he has always been very kind to me, said Älida, gently and lingeringly, as if the thought were pleasant to dwell upon. Say, said Jane, yielding to her curiosity, how do you make him so afraid of you when he don't like you? He didn't like Mother, but he wasn't afraid of her. Why do you think he doesn't like me? Älida faltered, turning very pale. Oh, 'cause he looked once just as he did after Mother'd been going for— There, be still! You mustn't speak of such things or talk to me about Mr. Holcroft in such a way. And she hastily left the kitchen. When in the solitude of her own room, she gave way to bitter tears. Is it so plain, she thought, that even this ignorant child sees it? And the unhappy change began the day she came to. I can't understand it. We were so happy before, and he seemed to enjoy being near me and talking to me when his work permitted. He used to look into my eyes in a way that made me hope, and indeed feel almost sure. I received no such more looks. He seems only trying to do his duty by me as he promised at first, and acts as if it were all duty, a mere matter of conscience. Could he have discovered how I felt, and is so taking this way to remind me that nothing of the kind was in our agreement? Well, I've no reason to complain. I've accepted the relation of my own free will, but it's hard. Hard indeed for a woman who loves a man with her whole heart and soul. And he her husband, to go on meeting him day after day, and act as if she were his mere business partner. But I can't help myself. My very nature, as well as the sense of his rights, prevents me from asking more or even showing that I wish for more. That would be asking for it. But can it be true that he is positively learning to dislike me, to shrink from me with that strong repulsion which women feel towards some men? Oh, if that were true, the case is hopeless. It would kill me. Every effort to win him, even the most delicate and unobtrusive, would only drive him farther away. The deepest instincts of his soul would lead him to withdraw, to shun me. If this is true, the time may come with, so far from my filling his house with comfort, I shall make him dread to enter it. Oh, my only course is to remember just what I promised and he expected when he married me, and live up to that. Thus, husband and wife reached the same conclusion, and were rendered equally unhappy.